All right, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today for Leadership in Challenging Times. My name is Holly Amaya, and together with Anne-Marie Hoftailing, my business partner, I run Story Imprinting. And Story Imprinting is a company that teaches companies of all sizes, nonprofits, large companies, small companies, the art and science of storytelling. And it is my tremendous privilege today to have with us two incredible women, Johanna Schiavoni and Laura Fink. So before I tell you guys all of the shiny things about them, I'm going to share a story about these women. So I moved to San Diego 13 years ago. I'm a former lawyer, so when I moved to San Diego, I was joining the legal community and knew nobody. And I would go to these events, particularly Lawyers Club and Women Run events, and I could not escape these two women. Like, they were everywhere, right? And everybody knew them and everybody wanted to talk to them, and they seemed super nice and super approachable, which is, you know, kind of rare. And I thought, I've got to know these women. Who are these women? Flash forward 13 years later, I've had the tremendous privilege of working both professionally with each of them in different capacities and just getting to know them as people. And one thing I know about both Johanna and Laura is that they are just incredible humans. They're incredibly giving. They want to inspire others. They want to share their experiences with others. And so when Anne-Marie and I kind of conceptualized the idea of this series, we knew we wanted to talk about leadership, and Laura and Johanna were the first names that came to mind as people that we wanted to profile and feature. So Johanna is an appellate attorney, which means that she's the smartest and fanciest type of attorney. And she's also on the board of the San Diego Regional Airport Authority, as well as being the president of the San Diego County Bar Association. So she's got a lot of free time. And Laura Fink is a strategic communications expert. I have had the incredible privilege of working with her both on shared clients and in referring work to her. My background is in PR, and Laura is somebody in this town that I would trust implicitly with any corporate client that needs any type of communication. She's an absolute pro, she's the consummate pro, and she has this great experience and background in politics, which is so related to the work she does in strategic communication. So she's worked for Susan Davis, she's also worked for Tony Atkins, both luminaries. I mean, we all know of these incredible women. And I'm excited for today because I really want this to be a didactic experience where we're having a great conversation about what it means to be a leader in these very weird and very challenging times. So just a couple of logistical things. We are recording this, so we are going to be able to share this with folks after the event. If you've got questions, just type them in the Q&A box and we will get to those in real time. We're going to be very respectful of your time, so we will be out of here by 1 o'clock, absolutely. And if you've got any questions after the event, feel free to shoot me an email, holly@storyimprinting.com. Okay, I've done enough talking. Nobody wants to hear any of this. They want to hear from you too. So talk to me about what each of you do. Like, who are you? Why do you do it? What gets you moving? Laura, let's start with you.
So that was a very lovely and elevated introduction. I appreciate that. Being inescapable is both, makes me sound relentless and, and fun, I think. So I'm going to go with that. Yeah, that's great. So for those of you that are logged on that don't know what strategic communications is, sort of it's insider speak for helping people solve problems and achieve big goals through the art of communication, and really sort of shaping and elevating teams and organizations to rise to the occasion. So that's what I do. My background is in politics, which are it's kind of like being in crisis communications all the time on campaigns. That's where I cut my teeth. And now I really love working with leaders on the rise that are looking to achieve big things. And so I serve as a consigliere with communications as the focus, but I also really work hard to help people lay out the steps that they need to achieve their goals.
I forgot to also mention that Laura also spends some time on national TV networks talking about politics and communications issues and the news of the day. So speaking of inescapable, if you turn on the TV, you might see Laura's gorgeous face. So
I'm so sorry.
Johanna, how about you? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you also for the introduction. So as Holly mentioned, I'm an appellate lawyer. And so for those of you who are not lawyers or don't know that jargon, it means that I'm sort of the opposite of a trial lawyer. After a case has its life in the trial court, it's not over. And so the case may live on. I help develop the legal theories and tell the story of that case to the next level of court. It could be an appellate court or the Supreme Court, California or the US Supreme Court. And so it is a different kind of storytelling and a different way of thinking, a different lens through which we tell the story of a case, whether or not it was successful below. So that's what I do for my day job. And then as Holly mentioned, I also have a great passion for civic engagement and community service. And so I'm honored to have a number of roles where I get to really give back to the community there. In the legal community, I'm currently the president of the San Diego County Bar Association, which is the professional association for lawyers and legal professionals with 10,000 members in San Diego. And we're really focused on bringing people together around a common mission to elevate lawyers and the practice of law and to connect one another. We provide a lot of access to the courts as well, and that's something I'll be talking about later as one of the leadership roles I've had during this unique time. Yeah. And the other leadership hat that I wear right now, as Holly mentioned, I serve on the board of the Airport Authority, which is an independent government entity that oversees the San Diego International Airport and is a land use commission for other airports within San Diego County.
So can you guys talk a little bit about your individual paths to leadership, kind of what got you here, and maybe it's some seminal leadership experiences from early on that have kind of shaped your approach?
Sure, I'm happy to start that one off, Laura, if that's okay with you.
Go for it.
You know, when Holly first asked us to think about this topic, I was kind of mining my own journey. And it reminded me that one of my first sort of significant leadership experiences goes all the way back to middle school. So in sixth grade, I was selected, actually randomly, my name drawn out of a hat, to participate in a youth in government program. I grew up in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky. And I joined a delegation of other middle schoolers, mostly 7th and 8th graders, to travel to Frankfurt, the capital of Kentucky, and present.
Not Germany.
I'm sorry, what?
Not Germany.
Not Germany, Frankfurt with an O. And to present legislation, advocate for legislation, work in caucus, try to get those model bills passed. And some of those bills, I did that then for a number of years, and some of those bills eventually went on to the actual legislature for consideration. But it was really the first time that I had been in a group of peers like that, really advocating for a position and then having to build consensus. And I learned a lot about group dynamics. You can imagine, I mean, that was in middle school, right? So trying to build consensus, watching the 7th and 8th graders, how they interacted. And like I said, I was the only 6th grader. So if you think back to when you were 11 or 12 and what that age differential is like and what the power dynamic is like, as I was thinking about that story, I thought, you know what, I learned a lot then. I learned a lot about a key leadership skill being listening to other people, but listening both for their body language and their interaction and what they're persuaded by and what they're not persuaded by. So I think that's something that has stayed with me throughout other leadership journeys to present day.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that when Anne Marie and I are out doing trainings about storytelling in companies, one of the things we always say is like, you've got to listen, right? People will go in and they'll think like, I have these 3 points I want to make and I'm going to beat you over the head with that. And it's fine to be prepared and to have those message points. But if you're a really thoughtful listener, you are going to be a better leader, and because you're going to be more responsive to the needs of whether it's constituents or stakeholders, whoever you're working with, right? So that's a great lesson. I love that. And I also love, I mean, Louisville's close to my heart, so gotta love that too. Laura, how about you? What was, just in brief, kind of your path to leadership?
Well, I come from a long line of like fierce female leaders, including my grandmother, who is from Kentucky, just to throw that down. But you know, I like early on, since Joanna had her funny, cute story, mine is much more spastic. So, you know, I won't bore you with like the tales of Catholic school, but when I got to college, I was in a theater group and we did Shakespeare plays, and I went to an all women's college. And so we had, it was all women. So we played all the parts. So of course, you know, me being 5'10", I'm going to be a man every time. And so, but you know, I was really kind of a mediocre actor. I was okay. I could carry a broadsword. I could deliver a line, but you know, there were some really amazing women, some of whom are in Hollywood now, that were just, acted circles around me. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to run for leadership of this organization. So we had basically 4 officers, a secretary, a treasurer, a vice president, and a president. And so I kept running, like thinking I would sort of, work my way through. So I ran for secretary and I lost. And then I ran for treasurer and I lost. And then I think we had this thing called the housekeeper, which was an unglorious name for like making sure that we had there was a house where we did the plays and making sure it was taken care of and financed and all that. So I run and I lose like 3 different times until my girlfriend, who is now a Hollywood casting director, comes to me and she says, Laura, you're running for the wrong things. You need to run for the big 2. And I said, why? I was like, I kind of want to work my way up. She goes, well, one, to be a secretary, like you're always late to the meetings. And so you can't be the secretary because nobody's going to take you seriously. And the treasurer also, you just make jokes all the time. So nobody's going to take you seriously that you're going to run the books for like basically the same reason. But everybody looks to you to lead. So why don't you run for the big 2? And to be honest, to me, that just was, I didn't see myself in that place. Like that just seemed too big time to me. And so I hadn't stepped into that role. And that's a lesson that I continue to take and I see in all sorts of venues today, which, there is a void of leadership in virtually every organization and someone is going to step up and fill it. And if you don't, and it really should be you in many instances. So I ran for vice president, I won. And then I ran for president, I won. And I had a great time. And I felt like I was in my zone because my talents were shining, not on the stage, but off the stage. And sort of, we used to have our meetings at 10 o'clock at night because that was the only time all these busy women could get together. But like, how do you carry a meeting, get things done, and make people have a good time? And so those leadership skills, like see yourself and your skill set and do a real thoughtful analysis about where you belong, and I still acted on the stage in a very mediocre way, and that was all good. But I found the lane where I excelled, capitalizing on my strengths and buttressing my weaknesses.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because I certainly have learned that it's great to surround yourself with people who see your potential and believe that you can do really hard things when you probably don't think that you can. So let's talk a little bit about that with each of you. Like, who has been that person for you, and has that sort of influenced your own path to leadership, Johanna? Whether it's with the airport or the county bar, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, most certainly. So I'm a firm believer in giving back, reaching back, and elevating other people, because there is no doubt in my mind I would not be where I am today and have had the opportunities to lead without other people doing that for me. And I think it is also a key leadership skill to be able to look around and support others and bring them up, and make sure that even when you are in a visible position, really don't take the credit, elevate the others around you and give the credit away. And that to me is what makes other people want to join you. And then you're really solving problems together. And I have 2 sort of specific examples of that. I didn't grow up in San Diego. I didn't move here until I was already practicing lawyer for 5 years. And I started small. I joined 2 organizations, and both of them I joined because people asked me to. And again, that's another important point, just like with Laura's story, someone else asked us to do things. And so I was asked to join the American Constitution Society. It was a lawyer chapter starting in San Diego when we were first getting off the ground. And then I joined an Inn of Court, which is like a mentoring group modeled on ethics and professionalism. And I joined those 2 groups in around 2009. And I had really only been in San Diego for about 2 years and 2.5 years. So I didn't really know that many people. My first job in San Diego was in a working for a judge. So it was a very small working group. So I just didn't have that many contacts, and not being from here. But the people that I met in those organizations really pushed me to branch out and showed me the way that San Diego is a community that welcomes people who will, as Laura said, step into that void.
Yeah.
So even after only being here for 2 years, Laura and I have a good friend named Sarah Boot, and Sarah Boot said, you know what, I would really encourage you to run for the Lawyers Club board. And so Holly, it's interesting that you say that when you first moved here, which was just a few years after me, that you saw me as a visible person within Lawyers Club. But that was really because Sarah reached out to me and said, you should really think about this. You've gotten involved. I was involved in the leadership development committee there. And Sarah encouraged me to run for the board. And then, you know, who served as almost my sort of champion committee, my campaign committee, was the people from those other 2 groups that I was involved in.
Oh, interesting.
they were lawyers, right? So
Yeah.
the American Constitution Society group and the Welsh Inn of Court group then reached out to all their contacts and colleagues and helped me get elected to the Lawyers Club board. And so I then served there for a number of years, but that never would have happened had people not opened the door for me and then said, look, you can do this, you should do this, you would be a great asset to this organization. And so that is how I got started, really, in the legal community, small. And then what I did was take from each of those experiences, I like to think of them as just building skills and building relationships. And so the first board, quote unquote board, I had ever served on was that ACS board. I had served on my sorority board in college. But I learned and I observed how does someone effectively run a meeting? How does someone not effectively run a meeting?
Right.
How can you accomplish an agenda? How can you set big strategic goals? And I sort of learned and watched good leaders, and I also read a lot about it. I'm a huge nonfiction junkie. I read a lot of nonfiction leadership books. I know that sounds like I'm a huge nerd, but I am. I'll just admit it. But I love to be a student of people and how to achieve big end goals. So that was my sort of starting out story. And then you mentioned the airport, and I have to give big kudos to Laura. And this is sort of now fast forward 10 years from that experience. It was in late 2017, early 2018. Laura reached out to me and said, you know, there is a vacancy on the airport authority board, and it's this big visible position with a lot of significant oversight authority for the airport. And, you know, the community really needs to do better in diversifying the voices on those boards and commissions that are appointed high profile seats. And Laura said, and I want you to put your name in the ring, and you can do it. And you'll, this is even hard to admit, but my first reaction to this, and I said this to Laura, I said, I don't know anything about aviation. I am not qualified. I'm not qualified to serve on that board.
And that would be a very common response, I would imagine, right? If we could see people's heads, they'd be nodding, I'm sure, right?
And so my first thought was, I can't do it. And I'm not the right person. And Laura said to me, wait, I remember very distinctly, she was driving in her car and she was on a speakerphone, and she said, Johanna, she said, you are qualified. You can do this. Do big things. Do big, important things.
Everybody write that down.
Yeah.
So I was sleep deprived at the time, and I was in this, it was 2018, because 2018 for me was relentless. And my work was inescapable. And so I'm there and I'm like, I got to call Joanna. I got to do this other thing. And so I'm driving, I'm missing exits, but I'm driving and I'm talking, and I can't believe what I'm hearing, because you hear like a thumbnail of Joanna's accomplishments, much less you see her actually lead. You would know that she is like just amazingly qualified for this position. And so, but the problem was the sleep debt and like the truncated time, and I had to be somewhere. So I needed to convince her like in that 2 minutes. And so that's what I said to her. And I remember thinking at the time, sometimes you say things and you're like, oh God, was that the right thing? I mean, here I am, the communications person. Did I communicate that the right way? But I think the distinction was, the other thing is you don't want to not acknowledge when people have done really important things, like everything that she's talked about. And she's done a whole ton more that she hasn't talked about like that really has, created a network and a web of young leaders in this community. And so you want to acknowledge that. But I also wanted to say, like, you know what, it's time to step up to a different level, to a level with more budgetary responsibility, to a level with a higher profile, and sort of step in. And so like trying to figure out, like, these were smaller important things that were preceded, but now it's a big important thing, a broader stage. So it was just amazing to me, because I literally had 5 minutes. I was like, so that made me be very blunt. And I was just lucky that Johanna reserves it. Yeah.
I mean, it stuck with her.
What was so significant though about it was, in addition to thinking of me first, reaching out and encouraging me, she also made it very doable, because what Laura said was, why don't I just introduce you to some people you can meet with to talk about it, learn more about it, and see if you're a good fit. And so that was really the right approach, because it's a position that requires mayoral nomination. It requires city council confirmation. It was a big step for me, but she made it very accessible, and she helped me see myself in the role. And frankly, that is what both good friends, but also really good leaders do in identifying other people and bringing them along.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of scholarship on this, like in Harvard Business Review and stuff like that. Like we talk a lot about mentorship, which is important, but we also need people that are going to champion us, right? And there is a difference. And I don't have enough time and on this webinar to go through all of that, but I would encourage folks who are here, you know, just do some quick Googling about that. There's tons of great articles, and it's true. I mean, these experiences illustrate that point perfectly. So, you know, I'm going to state the obvious. We're living in a really weird time, right? I mean, I keep using the word unprecedented. I've used it so much that I'm tired of my own phrase, but it's true. And, you know, times like this, the likes of which we have not seen in our lives up to this point, require really steady, conscious leadership. And you both have been on the front lines of this in your respective professional endeavors and leadership positions. So what advice do you have to people who are here about how you can be effective and steady and conscious and stay the course as a leader when literally, I mean, we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring?
So I'll take that one. I have been, as a student of leadership and communication, I have been fascinated by watching our national and our statewide, as well as our local leaders, step up to the plate to try to take on this crisis. And the sort of consistent theme, I always talk about leadership in crisis, or really in crisis communication specifically. It's sort of like turning up the volume on what you should be doing anyway. Totally. And so you know, you see them stepping up and communicating consistently with their constituencies, and you know, you see it, and you know, whether you're talking about, you know, Andrew Cuomo, the love of New York housewives everywhere, or Gretchen Whitmer is doing it in Michigan. You see Gavin Newsom is doing it here. Governor Mike DeWine, just in case you thought I was only going to say Democratic names, he's a Republican doing it quite well in Ohio. Yeah. And what they do, and I sort of, if you watch those briefings, because if you have spare time and you just want to be relaxed, you could watch one of the briefings. There's three things: honesty, empathy, and clarity. Mm-hmm. So honesty, they have the facts. They've surrounded themselves with leaders that can answer questions that they can't. And they're honest. They're honest about what they know. They're honest about what they don't know. And they're honest about uncertainty, which is sometimes the hardest thing to do. We think leaders should be just strong and know everything, but people aren't. You're not going to be believable, and especially in times like these. Empathy. You know, people, I talk to leaders every day, and they just want to be just the facts man, you know, up there with their fact sheets and their statistics. And those things, people are tuned in. They want to know. An audience is everything. Everything's driven by what your audience needs, not what you need. What does your audience need to know? What does your audience need to feel? And those briefings, you'll see Cuomo does it quite well. Where one time he recited, he's doing these briefings for like an hour. He recited the state motto of New York, which is on the flag, and he put it in his slides. And you know, it was about who we are as New Yorkers and making it through this. Here they were at the apex of their crisis, and he was talking to them and had empathy for the struggle that they were going to, and gave them a higher cause and purpose. But he also, you know, he talked about that. So those are the three things that I really think, you know, we can all latch onto, whether we're, you know, in front of TV cameras or we're talking to people on a Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely. Johanna, how about you? I mean, I know with respect to the Bar Association, you guys were like on the front lines of this. You closed before a lot of other organizations did. You made a lot of decisions in a really abbreviated amount of time. So anything that you took away from that you would share?
Yeah, and you know, I would echo a lot of what Laura said. I think you know, clarity and empathy, and I love the analogy of turning up the volume on what you should be doing anyway. Mm-hmm. So at the Bar Association, you know, as I kind of said in my introductory comments, we're really focused on serving the legal profession and member service. So everything should come from a people-focused place. And so when we decided, we closed, we have a co-working space, or a space where we host programs where people can drop in. It's right near the courthouse. We actually closed that on March 6th. So now it's sort of looking back with 2020 hindsight, that's so long ago, obvious, but it was 2 weeks really ahead of the governor's shelter-in-place order, and it was really before even a lot of businesses were having employees work at home. At least in San Diego. And so, but we did that, and we made the decision, and we took decisive action. We communicated with our members the day before doing that. so that people would know what we were thinking. We were transparent and why. The why was to protect our members who would come to the space. It was to protect our employees who work in the space, to protect any clients who would come to the space for meetings. It was really with a people-focused center that we made that decision to protect people and to follow what we thought was the coming guidance, and we were following public health guidance. And so, yeah, we were out there, and it was but you have to have then confidence in the decisions you make and be decisive. And as you said, we were early, but we acted swiftly. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I would say, in addition to being out front, is to be adaptable, right? So what we said in that communication was, this is what we know now, and here's the best decision we can make, and we have you in mind in making that decision. And if things change, we will change, and we will adapt. And we also tried very hard, my executive director, Jill Epstein, and I, in a series of special communications weekly to our members, in addition to our normal communications, to really show that we were following the situation, provide helpful information, but also to show great empathy for what our members were going through. Wow. And I will tell you, I've gotten a lot of feedback from our members on those very points. So one of those communications was the week that we all learned that kids weren't going to go back to in-classroom learning for the spring. And it really took a toll, and it really hit our members who are struggling to be lawyers and keep up with their day jobs while also homeschooling children. And I could hear in the voices of my friends and colleagues, and see it in the fatigue on their faces in Zoom meetings, that was sort of, as that reality settled in about 4 weeks into the crisis, it was really a turning point where people needed to feel wrapped in support. And so we addressed that head on, and we communicated very vocally about what we were doing to try to help them with the lawyer part of their lives, and what we were going to do to support them with the wellness part of their lives. And showing, as Laura said, having great empathy and compassion for people. I mean, that is incumbent on leaders to be successful. And sort of the last thing I'll say on that is, it's also important for leaders to take care of themselves, right? So leaders, in order to be calm and to be steady, to be thoughtful, exercise good judgment, communicate, and be transparent, you also have to inwardly build your strength and your own resilience and take care of yourself. And modeling that then because if I run myself ragged, I'm not setting a good example for my executive director or the staff or for my board. And so I think that's something that in crisis, sometimes people forget, because the adrenaline and the stress is what people often run on. But in order to exercise really good judgment and have the capacity to have that empathy, I think people really need to think about making sure they're taking care of themselves.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And you mentioned feedback, which is really important, right, for anything that any of us do. And there's all kinds of feedback, and some of it's helpful and some of it's not. But what can you guys tell me about just how you solicit and how you process feedback as a leader?
So I try to do it regularly, because maybe it's partially because the thought of sitting down with someone and says, what did you think of my last year of work, seems very scary to me. So I try to get constant feedback as I'm going along. And part of that is creating a space where people feel that they can be honest with you, even if honesty is a critique of your own work or your own presence as a leader. And that's hard to do, but I think you can open the door to that by being empathetic, by offering specific opportunities to comment on specific situations. And, I always, no matter who it is, if it's somebody that is on your team, that is hierarchically, lower on the food chain than you, or someone that you're reporting up to, the relationship should be, similar in many instances. And I think, you got to think about them as each of these groups as stakeholders. And I talk about it like, know your big and your small rooms. We've been talking about the big rooms, the big communication. Joanna's highlighted it, where she's talking about her membership, her audiences. And then you have your small rooms, which are your stakeholders. And taking care of those, soliciting feedback will inform you to make sure you have the information that you need as a leader to make effective choices. And, I look at two examples of that, and I'll give you one local and one national. Nancy Pelosi, this is her game. You can actually critique her for her big room strategy. She's not the best public speaker in the world, but she is world beating and is unparalleled in her small room strategy. She knows how many votes she has on any given day. She knows about the possibility of advancing any piece of legislation. She has her finger on the pulse of all of that. And that's a larger conversation of how she does that around power, but truly takes care of her small room. You know, a great example of that leadership is Toni Atkins here. She takes care of her small room. She, you know, as a leader, her caucus and making sure that all of the members of the Senate, as well as the governor, are informed and sort of taking care of both of those. And then she's also got a district where she has to engage. And so those constituency groups, taking care of those small rooms will make sure that you're going to be effective later on, because you're going to already know where they're at, because you're not going to get surprised as you move forward. And when you see leaders get surprised, whether it's by an advocacy group or an internal, you know, leader or group of workers, it's because they haven't been talking to them. They've neglected them. So that's really important.
Yeah, Johanna.
Yeah, I think a constant feedback loop is really important for leaders, and it, you know, there's an important point in developing big strategy and big vision, and it's something I want to leave viewers with today about keeping your eye on your big vision and your strategy, even when you're in crisis. As Laura says, it's turning up the volume on that, but you shouldn't necessarily be jerking back and forth in developing strategy. It should be part of an amplification of your strategy. And so I'll just give some examples about how we executed this on feedback within the county bar. So we've done this in three distinct ways. One was just a few weeks into the pandemic, as things were continuing to unfold, we rolled out a member survey, and we asked our membership, what do you need? What do you need right now? What do you anticipate needing in a few months? And do you have anything to offer? And we got a lot of really terrific responses from members who had great skills to offer, webinars about wellness, about coaching, about, we're hosting a town hall in a week and a half from some small and solo firm attorneys who will talk about strategies for survival or marketing during the pandemic. And so we really tapped the resources within our membership to elevate that. But what we did was we asked people what they needed. And I think that that's a really important, as Laura said, talking to your stakeholders so you're not surprised. It gave people a chance to tell us what they thought. We also asked them what they thought we were doing well and what they wanted us to see us do differently. And it was also a very helpful and learning experience, frankly, for our leadership team, our board of directors, and our staff, because the responses we got were actually overwhelmingly positive. And that's not necessarily what we were expecting, but it was actually a really nice boost and affirmation of the trajectory that we were on. And we got some ideas and some suggestions for improvement. But that was sort of one prong of the strategy, was to literally ask people what they need and what they want, and what they have to offer. And then a number of other associations actually have now asked us for that survey, and we've shared that widely because other organizations want to model on how we did that, because it was a really useful tool. The second thing I did was my board of directors, which has 19 directors, is also a group of stakeholders. They're as devoted to this organization as I am and the community, and they are a really diverse set of directors who have broad reach into different segments of our profession. So I have been constantly asking them, both in email updates, providing information, but also at our board meetings and committee meetings, how are you doing? What are you hearing? What is your law firm facing? So every range from some of our lawyer board members, their law firms have had to furlough employees. Some of them are really busy. The employment lawyers are really busy because everyone wants to know how to manage the COVID situation, right? And so we've had a whole range of responses within our own group that almost provide a great proxy for our membership. But you have to actually ask the question and then listen to what is going on to help inform that. It helps inform me as a leader. And then the other prong of this is, I meet weekly with my executive director. I talk to her almost daily, but I frequently talk to her because she manages our professional staff. I run the volunteer side and she manages the professional staff. How are the staff feeling? How are the staff doing? What can we do as the volunteers to help you, to support you as you manage the staff? they've now, because we sent them to work remotely really early on, they've been at this for 2 months. It's different than when you're used to working in an office every day and seeing people. It can be more exhausting. Many of them, have young kids at home, or parents or others they're taking care of. And so really asking the questions with a lot of compassion about how is everyone doing, and how, not just saying we're in this together, but really showing people that you're in it together, and then responding to the information you get. So those are just kind of 3 examples of that feedback loop that I think have been critical, that have helped us, identify talent within our and ideas within our own organization, that but for this crisis, we may not have elevated that talent in the same way.
Yeah, and a lot of what I'm hearing too here is just empowering, right? Like you in doing all of that, you're empowering the people who work with you to step up, right? And that's, I think now again, like we're in this very odd moment, and this, I think as odd as this moment is, and how as easy as it can be to focus on kind of the negative, there's so many opportunities, I guess is what I'm saying. And I've been home for 2 months, so I've had a lot of time to think about this, but I love that piece about empowering others, because I think especially as women, I feel very strongly that it is our duty to, reach and pull people up alongside us and say, you can do this. Like, good leaders are, you're one person. You can't be everywhere and doing everything, that just becomes like completely untenable, and then you're kind of like a dictator. So.
Well, and to I think that's a great point, Holly. And to your point, whoever you're leading, whatever group you're leading or seeking to lead, benefits from a diversity of voices, not just so they don't hear, your voice the whole time, but also because of the perspectives and all of the things, and ideas that you can generate, that Johanna was talking about as she solicited feedback from her constituencies. But I want to tell a story. I had a client, because my clients range, and because I think leadership, I think a lot of times people they look at leadership as somebody with the title.
Yes.
And in fact, what empowering leaders is, and all of that, we use that catchphrase, but what it means is that you are developing opportunities for people to step up in every space. And so, and I'll give you an example. It was, I don't know if you remember, God, it seems like a while since the hotels were in business, but there was one of the largest hotel strikes against the largest hotel chain, Marriott, in the world. It was a nationwide strike, but here locally, we had a group of hotel workers that really were giving up their livelihoods in order to negotiate for better pay and retirement and healthcare. And one of the leaders that was tapped by some of the local union organizers was a woman named Fanny, and she was in her 20s. And she came to me, and I had, she's bilingual. She actually speaks fluent in both languages, but she's more comfortable in Spanish. So on a Saturday, I was prepping her to give a big speech at a rally, and she agreed to do it. And of course, there's press there. There's several hundred people there. There are a whole bunch of people that have, that aren't paying their bills right now, or that are relying on savings so that they can, they can step up and try to fight to have a voice on the job. And she was afraid to do it. And not at first, but after a little while. And the reason she was afraid was not because she was afraid of a microphone. It was because she felt that because she didn't have children, that there were better people to raise the cause. Now, she was a hotel maid, which means that she pushed a 200-pound cart every single day. She flipped 30 beds a day, and she was on call. And then she went home, and she lived with her mother and her brother. And I said, but Fanny, why don't you have kids? You have a significant other. Are you planning to have kids soon? She says, I can't afford it. And I said, yeah, then that's what you say. So empowering people to lead with their stories, and to realize that they don't have to be, in her mind, she had to have kids to be able to have the authority to talk about that. But the reality was that she did not. And so, like, whatever we disqualify ourselves with, and for everybody it's different, and for every situation it's different, figuring out, finding that sounding board, finding, having that network. If you are a leader, then you should be talking to your folks about what's holding them back, because it's not always the obvious, and it doesn't fit into a box. And so, like, if you would have asked me, and Fanny went out and gave a rousing speech, she decided to give it in Spanish and with a translator, and it was like, it would have, if there was a dry eye, like, I don't want to know you. But it was incredible. And it was because, because she fought through that, and she did it all on her own, and was really phenomenal. But I think, she had a union leader that saw that in her. And I was able to work with her in that way. And I honestly, it's one of the proudest things I've ever done. And so I just feel like when you take the time and the effort to really get to know who you're working with and elevate them to positions of authority and leadership, the whole organization wins, not just that person, not just you.
Yeah, I love that story about her. We have a question from one of our attendees, so thank you for the question. The question is, how do you move people to think about long-term goals when in a time of crisis, they are focused on getting through today, which is a very valid question. So what do you guys say?
Let me give a short answer to this, then I'll kick it to Johanna. So Rahm Emanuel says, never waste a good crisis. Of course, the apex of, sort of vicious pragmatism in politicking. But I would say this, they're not independent. They're two in one. They're the same. So you have your long-term goals, but what opportunities and sort of seeing what are the opportunities that are afforded because of, whatever the new normal is, and kind of adjusting your vision to be able to see those. And if you can't see the forest for the trees, soliciting that feedback from people who might have a different perspective.
Yeah, Johanna?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, what Laura said, and I'll give some stories behind it about how we've done this at the County Bar Association. So 2020, in a normal 2020, what we thought we were going to be doing this year was developing and implementing, rolling out a 3-year strategic plan. We went away in January as a board of directors with all of our senior staff, the senior directors at our association, to an offsite retreat. We had just come to the end of a 6-year strategic plan, and we had a professional facilitator. We had an amazing weekend where we developed six strategic goals to implement over the next 3 years. And then we're building out that plan, and then, COVID hits. But the number one priority on those 6 goals was to develop, engage, and sustain membership. So that is a goal we can continue to work on. It may look a little different. It may feel a little different because for an organization that normally has a lot of in-person events, we've had to pivot what that looks like. But we are still fundamentally a member service organization and a member engagement organization. And so that is our number one strategic goal. So we continue to have our eyes on that. And right now, member service looks like supporting people through this crisis and helping them think about how they're going to practice law and how they're going to stay healthy and be well as lawyers and develop skills and relationships as lawyers after COVID. Right. And so we have not taken our eye off that goal. Again, I'll go back to Laura's analogy earlier about turning up the volume. So you really need to center yourself in whatever your company's mission is, whatever your personal mission is, whatever the organization's mission is, and your values and what your strategic plan is, and continue to evaluate your crisis response through that lens.
Yeah.
You should always be thinking about what those long-term goals are. A couple of our other long-term goals that we set out as a group are to promote and provide wellness opportunities. So we were already thinking about that and providing wellness opportunities in the legal profession. There is currently a crisis of wellness in our profession in particular. Among young law students and young lawyers, there's very high anxiety, there's substance abuse. This is in many professions, but in the law in particular. So we were already focused on that. When crisis hits, again, turning up the volume on what that strategy looks like to serve around that goal. And so what I would encourage the question asker to think about is what are the long-term goals and how can you create interim implementation and crisis focused strategies that are still in alignment with your values, because you do need to be in alignment with your organization's values, your personal values, and your strategy, but keeping in mind that big picture vision is really important. Oh, you know what? We knew this was a possibility. We might lose Holly. Her internet connection sometimes goes in and out. So Laura and I are just going to have to continue the conversation until Holly jumps back in. But I think it's a really thoughtful question. And I guess the other topic I would say, welcome back, Holly.
Sorry, guys.
Hello.
Internet.
The other thing I would say is to the question asker is, what is underlying the particular stress that you as a leader are working to address? So the question was about how to move people and think about longer term vision and bigger goals when you're in crisis. You also need to meet that person or that group of people where they are. If they are so focused on the crisis, help them see the strategy and addressing the crisis as part of the bigger picture strategy. It can be hard to move people off of that when they're really concerned about the public health data, their own personal health, their family's health, but helping people see how they're part of a bigger picture. But also you may just really have to meet people where they are in that specific need, and then leverage other people around them to provide a support network to help move the group back to the common goal.
So just pivoting a little bit from there, a question I have for both of you, and particularly Laura for you, because you definitely go take the flak on national TV talking about, sometimes with a very unfriendly audience. How do you drown out or ignore or push aside extraneous narrative, right? Like, how do you stay true to whether if it's an organizational perspective, sort of your mission and what you stand for, or if you are making some kind of speech or presentation on behalf of an organization or a cause, how do you stay true to what it is that you want to say and what you stand for when literally everyone is like clawing at you for the narrative, for control of the narrative, that is?
Such a great question, and such a common question, because we all, even if that's not happening, we do it to ourselves. I've run into so many leaders that are like, their core messaging, is around A, B, and C, but they're like, somebody's going to say D about me. And like, I really feel like D because I don't have this experience. Like, somebody's going to mention that I don't have a CPA, and I'm like, so you don't have a CPA, facts. But I think there's two things. One is finding a point of agreement, like finding a way to work in the context, acknowledging the context, and then staying true to your core messages. Because at the end of the day, if the news environment is peddling a context, then, like stocks are crashing, your company everything is going to be terrible for, or unemployment is the story of the day, whatever that is. I mean, ultimately, if you're talking about your core competencies within that context, you have to acknowledge the context, because it is what it is. If it's if there's a hurricane outside, we can't pretend it's sunny,
right.
But at the same time, you can come back to that. Don't lose sight of it. Don't let somebody else take your message. Don't let somebody else define, and this is true whether you're worried about not being a CPA or you're worried about whatever the news story of the day or the media environment is looking like. Because truly the temptation will be high, but we all know, and in political campaigns, this is the goal. This is all you do is try to get in your opponent's head so that you can take them off their message and talking about what you want to talk about that's advantageous to you. Now, it's not always that adversarial, but the takeaway is the same.
Johanna, how about you? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think communication when you're in leadership now, whether you are the leader with the title, or whether, as Laura was saying, whether you are a stakeholder leader, I think it's really important to be authentic, to be truthful, to show a lot of empathy when you're in crisis in particular. And so those are really many of the guiding principles. I really have wanted to over communicate with our members, and provide them with what we felt like was a lot of information and a lot of communication, and people have really welcomed that. And if people don't want to read the over communication, they can just delete it.
So Johanna, question for you though. Yeah. Can you talk, because I think you're a great example of this. How do you infuse authentic leadership into your style? Like, how are you authentic? What does that mean?
So I'll go back to the message that really resonated, I think, with a lot of members when we were communicating around the school closures and what life was going to look like. This was 4 weeks ago now. But really at the top of the message, it had to be an acknowledgement of where people were, what they were feeling about the school closures. We had a lot of news that week. And so it's right out of the gate showing that we understand where they are. And the message that I was carrying on behalf of the association was, you're not alone. Right. And that is not, you don't think of lawyers as being, trying to wrap their members in a big hug, but the goal, right. That's not how people typically think of our profession. But if you know me, that's really much more my human style, my authentic style as a person, is to really engage with people, really listen to people. And since I can't do that by looking them in the eye right now, I needed to find a way to communicate to people the same message, that they are not alone. And part of the other way we did that was so to acknowledge the particular hit that we were all taking at that time, that we were all feeling, and it was sinking in, but then also to situate the crisis within our own history. So our association has been around for 120 years. We survived the Depression, and we helped lawyers through the Depression. We helped lawyers through the Spanish flu. We have been through 2 world wars. We have been through other crises before. And while this is something we've not experienced, and I've had my group of past presidents reach out to me and say, lean on us if you need us, but none of us have ever faced what you are facing as president of this organization, but lean on us if you need us. What I wanted to communicate to our members was, this is unprecedented for now, but we have also been here for lawyers for 120 years, and we are going to be here for you, and you are not in this alone. Please let us know how we can serve you, and here are all the things that we can and are doing to serve you now. And we wanted to really tell people we were meeting them where they were. And that was a message that I think, again, it started out by acknowledging where people were, and then showing them what we were thinking, and being really transparent and upfront about everything we were doing, and also inviting them to be part of the conversation. And so those, I think, are you asked about how I do that. And so, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And it's also showing vulnerability, right? It's, again, I said, you don't normally think of a lawyer leader as someone who's reaching out in that way, but being vulnerable so that other people who are feeling vulnerable know that they are not alone. So you're not just saying the words, but that you're actually communicating it. That has been at least how I have been managing that through this crisis. And one thing I'll say is some of it is also policy, right? I'm fortunate to work in an organization that has a really amazing governing structure, and we have a policy for how to manage crisis communications, and it puts actually the president in charge. And the president can delegate to others to be the face of communication for the organization. But one of the other pieces of advice that I would have for anyone running an organization is that if you don't have emergency response policies and crisis communication policies, now is a really good time to think about where you consolidate that, who your decision makers are, who is going to be the spokesperson for the organization. Now, maybe in a different year, there would have been a president who wouldn't have been wanted to be the person doing that, and they could delegate to someone else, right? They could delegate to the executive director or a communications professional. But for me, this year, in this circumstance, it was something I was comfortable doing, and I was empowered by our policies to do it. And I really felt a great responsibility to take that on, and to, frankly, just to be human.
Yeah, totally. Yes. Applause. I mean, this is one thing that I've talked to, I know both of you about, and I've talked to, lots of colleagues about, like at the end of the day, like you're not a one-dimensional person, you have, and I think, there's beginning to be more of a recognition that you can be more than one thing. Like you can be an effective leader and a totally kick-ass attorney and formidable in court, and you can also be a vulnerable human that is, navigating this crisis like the rest of us. And so I think that's just definitely a point that bears repeating and remembering. We have a couple of more questions, and I have to thank the two of you for continuing to speak as my internet has, stopped twice in the middle of this. I mean,
we missed you when you're gone. We missed you.
Right? I know you did, right? So, okay, a couple of additional questions. Emily is asking, can you please share a few main principles that leaders and aspiring leaders can always be improving upon?
Principles that we can be improving upon. Joanna, I'm gonna let you go first on this one. Hand the mic.
I'll come back to a couple points we've talked about, we've woven through, but kind of summarize a couple of the points that I personally lean on, particularly in times of crisis, but these are things that I think are important at any point. As I said, being steady and calm in leadership. I also think it's important to convene who are the relevant decision makers. I was just talking about policies. So you need to know who your decision makers are, but you should also be gathering information from experts. So that went back to the Bar Association. When we decided to close early, it was based on information gathered from a lot of experts. It wasn't just me and my executive director getting in a room and making this decision. We talked to a lot of people, we convened the decision makers, and then we got out there and we communicated the decision. But we did it again in a steady and calm way. And we did it in a way that said, this is the decision now, but we may need to adapt that decision. So I I think adaptability is also a really important criteria or a skill that you'll want to develop. Being decisive. So when we got out there and we said, this is what we're going to do, we didn't then say, but what if our members are angry? And what if people don't like it? We said, look, here's the decision and here's why. And I think telling the why is really important for leaders so that you bring people into the thought process, and maybe they don't agree with everything you're doing, but they can understand it. They feel like they were part of that decision. I think communicating is really important. I mean, frankly, in a crisis, over communicate and be transparent about it. And the transparency for me folds in everything Laura was saying about clarity and empathy. Those are really important attributes, I think, when you are communicating. And then my last 2 points, I guess, again, I said take care of yourself. So be thinking about what that means for you. You need to be exercising your best judgment as a lawyer. So sharpening your own tools for how you become resilient, whether that's getting enough sleep, getting exercise, eating well, maintaining social connection with people who you find supportive, drowning out the toxicity. Those are all important things to taking care of yourself as a leader to set an example. And then lastly, I would say keep your eye on the big picture because this crisis, while it may feel like it's going to go on for months, it's still in the long term is only temporary. And so keeping yourself and your organization focused on a big picture, and that's good advice, I think, whenever you're in leadership, because even though I'm president of the County Bar Association this year during this crisis, if it hadn't been COVID, it would have been something else.
Right.
So staying focused on what the organization's mission is what has to be your guiding focus as a leader, so that you don't internalize every criticism and every slight and every disappointment. And you just say, okay, that's a lesson learned. I won't make that mistake again, or we won't make that mistake again, or that strategy didn't work, but we're going to keep our eye on the big picture. So those are my takeaways.
Thank you for those. And there's another question that I'll pose to you, and then Laura, you can answer this as well in conjunction with the other question if you want to. And this is the last question I think we're going to have time for. Do you recommend any literature or courses that have helped you become effective leaders? So like, what are you reading? What have you read that moved you?
Yeah, so there are 2 sort of foundational books when I started on my own sort of reading and learning journey. 2 of my favorites are Good to Great by Jim Collins. I think every Jim Collins book is worth reading, but Good to Great is in particular a really effective sort of toolbox. There's also a supplement to that book about, the book is about private companies, but there's a supplement about how the principles in Good to Great apply in both the public sector and in nonprofits. So I would recommend both of those. I actually gave that book as a gift to each of my board members this year at our retreat, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from our board members who read it and were really inspired. I think it's a sort of an evergreen, timeless book. The second book that I really love, and it's sort of outdated, but I love it anyway, is by Dale Carnegie, and it's called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yes,
yeah, and so he really talks, and many, many modern leadership thinkers really have written about, the same things that Dale Carnegie was saying a long time ago. And then one other leader was an amazing woman named Frances Hesselbein. She's the former executive director of the Girl Scouts, and she has written a number of really stellar books on leadership, and I have a number of them actually behind me. And so Frances Hesselbein is really an amazing woman leader who was very ahead of her time. So I would say anything that she's ever written is something you could read. And then the last thing I would recommend is, if you don't already subscribe to Harvard Business Review, I mean, Holly mentioned it earlier. I am a devotee of HBR. I get daily updates. They have a Women at Work podcast, but I read articles from there every single day, and then I get the magazine. It is a really worthwhile investment. They're making a lot of their content right now free during coronavirus, as many media outlets are, so you can probably get a sampling of it even without joining a subscription, but I highly recommend it. It's one of the best things I read.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Thank you.
Wait, what do you read? Do you read the Harvard Business Review? Is that what we read? Okay.
Yeah, you just happen to have that there on the table.
The Agile Executive. It's very relevant. This is the most recent issue. So I'm gonna jump on that. I knew Johanna was gonna kill it on like summarizing very succinctly the principles of leadership that were relevant. But I will say this. I'm going to say one that she implied but did not say explicitly. Trust yourself. Trust yourself that you're stepping forward. Trust yourself when you're making calls. Trust your intuition. Obviously gather that feedback and vet it. But at the end of the day, you have built a career and a set of skills that are valuable and that need to be shared. And so trusting yourself to have that conversation, to be able to proactively communicate, to take on that leadership role, to address the issues of crisis, to help people get unstuck during it is very important. And you kind of have it all there already. With respect to the literature, I am a student of leadership biography. So I love pick your favorite leader and go get a good biography, not the puff. If they're political, don't get the one they wrote during the campaign unless it's Barack Obama, because his are really good. But for the most part, those are a little spun. But I do think, looking at the unofficial biographies also that aren't spun negatively about leaders of the past and in the future, because then you'll learn through story. You'll learn how they confronted situations. And so you'll not only learn about that time period in history or that venue, you'll also learn how those leaders confronted it. I can't do all of the leadership nonfiction as much. So I love biography. But I will recommend one. And I had to look up the authors, but I've read this book. It's a communication book called Compelling People, The Hidden Qualities That Make Us Influential. And it's John Neffinger and Matthew Kohut. Great book. I use that all the time. It's one of those that I reread to remind myself when I'm not being disciplined or when I've lost a step or I feel like I don't have clarity of message. I use Compelling People because it's a great sort of dictionary, encyclopedia of how, to present yourself in context.
I love this. Okay, you guys, we are right at 1 o'clock. So sadly, we are going to have to stop. And so what that also means is that this is the last time my internet's going to drop me off and bring me back. So I think everybody is happy about that. So I'm taking recommendations for any ways to strengthen my internet connections. Feel free to email me privately. But thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Anne-Marie and I really view what we're doing with story and printing as being really part of the fabric of the business community. And we want to provide value to people during this really strange time. And so we will be doing these weekly. Then our next one's going to be on reinvention, and I'll be posting that to my social media. Please feel free to connect with me as well as our esteemed panelists on LinkedIn. Follow us on all of the channels. And if you have any feedback, I would love to hear it. So I want to thank you guys both for taking the time to do this. I know I learned a ton and I took down some book recommendations. And thank you everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Although what is time anymore? I mean,
what is time? Oh, time.
This was both a very educational conversation and also a lot of fun. So thank you both for that.
Good.
All right.
All right, y'all. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.